Good morning everyone, and welcome back to Border Watch Weekly. Here in InfoExpress, and if you think the US-Canada border has been quiet lately, you're in for a massive wake-up call. What I'm about to share with you isn't just news, it's a developing crisis that's reshaping North American immigration forever. Picture this, you're an immigration officer at one of Canada's busiest border crossings. Last July you processed maybe 150 asylum claims in the first week of the month. This July, try 761 claims in just 6 days. That's not a typo. We're talking about a staggering 400% increase that has officials on both sides of the border scrambling for solutions. But here's what makes this story even more explosive. This isn't happening in isolation. It's the result of a perfect storm of policy changes, political decisions, and human desperation that's creating ripple effects from Washington to Ottawa. So, grab your coffee, hit that like button, and let's dive deep into the biggest migration story you probably haven't heard about yet. Let's start with the raw data, because these numbers tell a story that politicians on both sides of the border are still trying to understand. The Saint-Bernard-de-Lacolle border crossing, that's the primary gateway between Quebec and New York State, has become ground zero for this migration surge. In the first 6 days of July alone, Canadian Border Services processed 761 asylum claims. Now to give you some context, during the entire month of July last year, this same crossing processed around 300 claims. We've essentially seen 3 months worth of asylum seekers arrive in less than a week. But it's not just about the raw numbers. The demographics are shifting too. We're seeing more families with young children, more people with professional backgrounds, and importantly, more people who initially tried to seek asylum in the United States before heading north. This isn't random migration. This is strategic movement by people who are increasingly viewing Canada as their backup plan when the US system fails them. Now imagine you're working at that border crossing. Your facility was designed to handle maybe 20 to 30 asylum claims per day during peak periods. Suddenly, you're dealing with over 120 claims daily. The infrastructure simply wasn't built for this volume. Processing each asylum claim isn't like stamping a passport. It requires detailed interviews, document verification, background checks, and coordination with multiple government agencies. A single claim can take anywhere from 3 to 8 hours of total processing time across different departments. What we're seeing now is a humanitarian bottleneck. People are waiting in temporary facilities for days, sometimes weeks, just to have their initial claims processed. And this is before they even enter the formal asylum system, which can take months or years to reach a final decision. This surge isn't just affecting Quebec border towns. These asylum seekers are being distributed across Canada, putting pressure on housing systems in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and smaller cities that were already struggling with affordability crises. We're seeing emergency housing being set up in community centers, hotels being converted to temporary housing, and local social services being stretched beyond their capacity. Some municipalities are openly questioning whether they have the resources to handle this influx while still serving their existing residents. The policy perfect storm. To understand why people are heading north, we need to look south at what's happening in the United States. The Trump administration's immigration crackdown isn't just tough talk, it's resulting in real policy changes that are pushing people toward the Canadian border. We're seeing increased workplace raids, faster deportation proceedings, and stricter asylum requirements. But here's the kicker. Many of these asylum seekers aren't undocumented immigrants trying to avoid deportation. They're people who entered the US legally, applied for asylum through proper channels, and are now facing delays, rejections, or policy changes that make their cases untenable. Some have been waiting in the US system for 2, 3, even 4 years, only to have their cases suddenly fast-tracked for denial under new guidelines. Others are seeing their work permits revoked or their ability to bring family members severely restricted. For these people, Canada represents not just a geographic alternative, but a legal system they perceive as more welcoming. But here's where the story gets really complicated. Just as more people are looking to Canada for refuge, The Canadian government is implementing some of its most restrictive immigration policies in decades. The 2025 to 2027 Immigration Levels Plan doesn't just cut permanent resident admissions by 20%, it fundamentally restructures how Canada thinks about immigration. For the first time ever, they're setting caps on temporary residents. This includes international students, temporary foreign workers, and yes, asylum seekers waiting for their claims to be processed. The government says this is about sustainable growth and infrastructure capacity. Critics argue it's a response to growing anti-immigration sentiment in Canadian polls. Either way, the timing couldn't be worse for people fleeing restrictive US policies. Now let's talk about one of the most important but, honestly, least understood pieces of this whole puzzle, the Safe Third Country Agreement. This 2004 deal between Canada and the US basically says that asylum seekers have to apply for protection in the first safe country they reach. On paper, this should prevent the kind of border shopping we're seeing right now. But here's the catch. The agreement was recently expanded to cover the entire border, not just the official crossing points. This was supposed to stop irregular crossings and, well, it actually worked. Illegal border crossings dropped from 165 per day to just 12 per day, but it's created an unexpected consequence. Instead of crossing irregularly between official ports of entry, asylum seekers are now arriving at official crossings with, more sophisticated legal strategies. They're coming with lawyers with detailed documentation of why the US system failed them and with arguments for why Canada should accept their claims despite the Safe Third Country Agreement. The result? Legal asylum claims are surging even as illegal crossings plummet. It's not the outcome either government expected. Human stories and real impact. Behind every statistic is a human story, and these stories really help us understand why this surge is happening now. Let me share a few examples that illustrate the broader patterns we're seeing. Take Maria, a Venezuelan professional who fled to the US 3 years ago. She applied for asylum, got a work permit, and started rebuilding her life in Florida. Then her asylum case was denied under new efficiency guidelines, and her work permit was revoked. She had 2 weeks to leave the country or face deportation back to Venezuela, where she fears for her life. For her, the Canadian border represents a second chance at safety. Or consider Ahmed, a Syrian refugee who was already living in Canada as a permanent resident. His elderly parents applied for US visitor visas to attend his wedding, were denied, then tried to claim asylum at the US border based on deteriorating conditions back home. When that failed, they headed north to Canada, where Ahmed is now sponsoring them through a different process entirely. These aren't isolated cases. We're seeing patterns of family reunification, professional migration, and what experts are calling asylum shopping, but not in the negative sense politicians use that term. These are people making rational decisions about where their legal cases have the best chance of success. The impact on Canadian communities has been immediate and visible. In Lacolle, Quebec, a town of just 700 people that houses the major border-crossing local resources, are completely overwhelmed. The town's only hotel is, permanently booked with asylum seekers. The local food bank is seeing triple its normal demand. But it's not just about resources. We're also seeing some remarkable stories of community support. Churches are organizing welcome committees, local businesses are creating job programs, and schools are rapidly expanding ESL programs to accommodate children whose families are in the asylum process. However, there's also growing tension. Some residents feel their small communities are bearing an unfair burden of national immigration policy. Town hall meetings are getting heated with debates about federal funding, local capacity, and whether Ottawa really understands what's happening in these border communities. This dynamic is playing out across Canada, from the border towns processing initial claims to the major cities where asylum seekers are eventually settled. It's creating political pressure that's influencing policy decisions in real time. Policy implications and future outlook. Short-term government responses. Both governments are scrambling to respond to this surge, but their approaches reveal fundamentally different philosophies about immigration and border management. On the Canadian side, we're seeing what officials call managed accommodation. They're opening new processing centers, hiring additional asylum officers, and creating temporary housing solutions. But they're also implementing stricter screening procedures and faster deportation processes for rejected claims. The Parents and Grandparents Program announcement this week, accepting up to 10,000 applications starting July 28th, is partly a response to this pressure. By creating more legal pathways for family reunification, the government hopes to reduce pressure on the asylum system. Meanwhile, the U.S. approach focuses on deterrence and enforcement. Faster processing means quicker deportations for many, but it also means some legitimate refugees are being pushed toward Canada before their cases can be properly heard. Long-term systemic changes. What we're witnessing isn't just a temporary surge, it's a fundamental shift in North American migration patterns that will have lasting implications for both countries. Canada is being forced to reconsider its image as a welcoming haven for refugees. The reality of processing capacity, housing shortages, and public opinion is bumping up against humanitarian commitments and international legal obligations. The U.S., meanwhile, is discovering that restrictive immigration policies don't make people disappear, they just push migration elsewhere. The Canada surge is proof that in an interconnected world, one country's immigration policy inevitably affects its neighbors. We're likely looking at a future where the US-Canada border becomes more militarized, more bureaucratized, and more contentious. The days of treating it as the world's longest undefended border may be coming to an end. This story is developing rapidly, and I need your help to keep tracking it comprehensively. If you're living in a border community, if you work in immigration services, or if you've been personally affected by these policy changes, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me what you're seeing in your area. Are local services overwhelmed? Are communities stepping up to help? Are you seeing political tensions rise? Your first-hand accounts help me understand the real impact of these policies beyond the official statistics. And here's something new we're starting. I'm creating a monthly immigration policy tracker that will be available to channel members. If you want early access to detailed policy analysis, behind-the-scenes research, and direct communication with me about story ideas, consider becoming a channel member. The link is in the description. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because immigration policy is changing almost daily right now. We're posting breaking news updates on the community tab whenever major developments happen, so you'll want those notifications turned on. The 400% surge in asylum claims at the Canadian border isn't just a number. It's a symptom of larger failures in how North America manages human migration in the 21st century. When people are forced to choose between safety and legal status, when families are separated by bureaucratic delays, and when communities are left to manage humanitarian crises without adequate federal support, we're all failing. But there's also hope in this story. We're seeing communities rise to meet challenges, legal advocates working around the clock to protect vulnerable people, and policymakers on both sides of the border grappling seriously with complex problems that don't have easy solutions. The decisions made in Washington and Ottawa over the next few months will determine whether this surge becomes a manageable policy challenge or a full-blown humanitarian crisis. Based on current trends and policy trajectories, we're likely to see this story dominate headlines for months to come. What's clear is that the old assumptions about North American migration, that the US is the destination and Canada is the backup, that borders can be managed unilaterally, that immigration policy doesn't affect neighboring countries, all of those assumptions are crumbling in real time. Here in Info Express, and this has been your deep dive into the migration story that's reshaping our continent. Stay informed, stay engaged, and I'll see you next week with another investigation into the policies and politics that affect us all. Until then, keep watching the border, because it's watching us too.